Well, I took as my title, Lessons for a Dry Season, because I don't know about you, but I've been running the sprinkler every day at my house. It has been dry, dry, dry. I don't know when our last rainfall was. Sometimes you get it here in Delaware. We don't get it in Dublin. It's very spotty. But in Dublin, we haven't had rain for over 3 weeks. It's been a long while. And everything is dry and brittle out there. And so it just got me to thinking about dry seasons and how we cope with them. How we cope with them physically a little bit, but more importantly, how we cope with them mentally, spiritually. There are dry seasons in all our lives, different times. Times when nothing seems to be flowing, where the creative juices don't seem to be flowing, where we just don't feel in the flow of life in some way. T.S. Eliot, the poet T.S. Eliot, called these times, this experience, the wasteland. There are times we feel like that in our lives, and it calls for certain mental spiritual skills to navigate those dry seasons, I think, and to move through them. So I was thinking about that, lessons for the dry times of our lives. What have we learned from our experience of having gone through them probably in the past, a time or two? Who in the past has experienced a dry season? About all of us, I think. There are just, our lives are kind of punctuated by times like this. There's a rhythm to it. Times when we feel like we're really in the flow of life, the juices are flowing. Times when we don't feel that way, when we feel there's a sense of stasis and stuckness and dryness. So here are the 5 lessons I guess I came up with, very basic kind of spiritual ideas, but things I come back to again and again, I think, when I'm thinking about how to get through these kinds of times. Number 1 is slow down. I think that's a very intuitive thing and a very basic thing. Just slow down in a dry, hot season. I think people know, especially in hot climates, that's a good time to nap. It's a good time for a siesta. It's a good time to slow it down and not keep pushing or trying to go faster or get more done. That's a time to pause, to do less, to simplify, and to wait for renewal. There's a fair amount of waiting involved. We slow down, we rest, we wait. We're intuitive about that. There's a wonderful old scripture from Isaiah, a prophecy from Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. It's like God will renew us as we wait, as we rest, and as we wait alertly. So that's the first one, and the simplest one to remember, I think. Slow down, rest, and wait. There's a promise in it, too. The energy will return, the juices will flow again, if we're willing to wait. Second one, I call keep priming the pump. Priming the pump is an old expression. It goes back to when, like, I guess, physically starting a new water pump of some kind. You get water into it in order to stimulate the flow, get it going. But it became idiomatically a phrase about putting time, energy, effort into anything you want to see grow. You put a little in, and you keep doing that in the dry times, even when it seems like the pump isn't working, there isn't much happening, we still keep priming the pump, which means we keep doing those activities, those gestures, keeping up those nourishing habits that we believe will stimulate growth, that they have been good for us in the past, they work, we're going to keep doing them, even if we don't feel like there's a lot coming back from it. So, in other words, we resist that tendency to kind of shut down, or to withdraw, or to be frustrated and think nothing is happening, so why keep it up? Why keep praying and meditating if nothing is happening? Why keep putting time and energy into certain habits if nothing is happening? No, we keep investing ourselves, we keep priming the pump in those things that we believe are nourishing for us at a deep level, even if we don't feel the effect of it right now. Persistence. Be persistent in those good and nourishing practices in our lives. There's an old passage from the essential Rumi, the Sufi poet Rumi, who said, "Work, keep digging your well. Don't think about getting off from work. Water is there somewhere." I like that. Water is there somewhere. It's as true inside us as it is outside us. We're going to tap into that wellspring again. And so we keep up our practices. In a dry time, we keep up those things that nourish us. I remember a time in years past, I lived in the Clintonville area, and it was a dry season. Nothing much was happening. It was an in-between place in life in terms of work, relationships, everything. And I kept up that morning walk and that daily meditation practice all through those dry seasons. Those are the kind of things we keep up. Even if it doesn't seem like they're bringing us a lot right now, you keep up what nourishes you. What nourishes you? Do you have a meditation practice, a prayer practice? Do you have a physical discipline that nourishes you? Whatever those habits are, we keep them going. We keep priming the pump in the sure and certain knowledge the water's going to flow again, that energy is going to flow again, will be renewed. Part of this priming the pump, too, is to keep a sense of expectancy. That promise from Isaiah, to kind of hold that in our hearts as we wait, as we keep priming the pump, doing these things that nourish us. We will be renewed. There's a power and presence within and around us. My earliest minister in life, E.V. Ingraham, said in one of his books on prayer, we need to go into prayer taking a bucket. Taking a bucket. It means with expectancy. And we don't always go into prayer that way or have that level of expectancy from God. I think too often, and I know I've spent years feeling that way, we think of God as sort of an ineffectual, kindly uncle, or something. Not a power and presence that can make anything happen for us, which is what Jesus taught, certainly. All things are possible. So when we're going into prayer or even just thinking an affirmative thought, oh, God is guiding me now. God fills and surrounds me with renewing life. We need to have an attitude of expectancy. Think of ourselves holding a bucket, taking a bucket as we go into prayer, as we close our eyes. And maybe go into it with an awareness so expectant that it's almost like just turning a faucet on in our home. We're opening a flow, and a tremendous and powerful flow can be the result of that. We're expectant as we go into prayer. So we slow down, we get intuitive, we wait, we persist in our nourishing practices. We try to have an attitude of expectancy. We will be renewed. The waters will get flowing again. Here's a third principle for the dry times, what to do in the dry times. Third one is dig deeper. Dig deeper. Wells must be dug deeper in dry times, yes? Wells need to go down farther. I remember in our neighborhood, before we were annexed and connected with City of Columbus water systems, everybody had their own well and septic system and so on. And some of the people who had to replace their wells or had difficulties, they had to go down farther, 200 feet or more, had to put those wells down. So it's a principle of life. When things go a little dry, you've got to dig a little deeper. I think it's as true in our spiritual lives too. And what does that mean for us spiritually? It could mean making a deeper commitment to our prayer practice. We've got some folks taking a meditation class in the church now. There's a resolve behind that, I think, to dig a little deeper. Maybe take my meditation practice a little more seriously, get some more resources going there, deepen that a little bit. Maybe there's some other way in which there's some guidance coming for you to just dig a little deeper internally, in your journaling, in your daily habits, in your morning routines, whatever it is. It could come out as a deeper commitment to something that's deeply nourishing for you. That's something to think about. I'm going to go on a little retreat next month. Something like that can be a way of digging a little deeper. Go on a prayer retreat. Go to some kind of a nourishing retreat experience somewhere. That can get you in touch with a deeper level, like digging a deeper well. Fourth one, know where to dig. Know where to dig. I was fascinated with, and I was doing some online research about divining. Y'all familiar with divining? I think the word for it is dowsing, something like that. And it's like a Y-shaped branch, often something like a witch hazel or a willow branch often. And there's a lot of, you can see some old pictures of people. It goes way, way back in history, the idea that you could find water or metal ores with a divining rod. And I saw some lovely old pictures from the 1800s of a guy holding a divining rod, looking very, very intent, very intuitive. following that divining rod to locate a vein or a source where there will be water down below. I find it kind of an interesting play on words. The word divine there means to predict. To divine is to predict, but it's also our word for divinity. So in a way, it's kind of about locating that divine wellspring, to divine that, which is, of course, inside us. It's inside us, this wellspring we're talking about. It's not somewhere else. It's not any external place, unless we mean it's everywhere, including in and through us. I had a friend years ago, Jeff, who talked about church. He grew up, it was very church-involved family, and he grew up as a child thinking that the church was God's house, where God lived, and nowhere else. So if you wanted to talk to God, you had to go to God's house at the church, and so he ran away from home once, and he went to God's house. They found him at the church. But I think that's a kind of a charming idea. We learn, of course, as we go along. God's house is here. This is God's house. We live and move and have our being in God, is the way the Apostle Paul put it. And so the wellspring we want to tap into is in here as well. Myrtle Fillmore wrote in one of her healing letters, God in the midst of us is a great steady stream of renewing and cleansing and vitalizing life. And we can have the use of this life if we will open up the channels of its flowing and draw from this source. Open up the channels, like opening a faucet again, the images. And she puts a little bit of the responsibility on us to open up to it. We don't create the flow, we don't make it happen. It comes from that wellspring in us, that's a given. But we have a certain responsibility to open up to it. Open up the channels. Don't be shut down or blocked off or withdrawn, but open. And that sort of means a lot of things. It means that we believe there's a power and presence that flows through us. We're expectant that it can flow through us, that it can rejuvenate us. We open that up. Jesus did the same great teaching again and again, that it's an inner well we need to open up the channels to and draw from an inner well. I love the gospel from John chapter 4 about the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman. You've probably all heard the story in one way or another. I'll retell it just very briefly. But Jesus is traveling with the disciples, and they enter a Samaritan village. The disciples go off in search of food, and he stays there by a well that's there. And the Jews and Samaritans are at odds. They have different religious practices, and the Jews consider the Samaritans unclean. There's a suspicion and an alienation between these peoples. But so Jesus is there by the well, and a Samaritan woman comes to draw water with a big jar of some kind. And Jesus asks her for a drink, and she's shocked because as a Jewish man, he shouldn't even be speaking to her as a woman and as a Samaritan. And he says, so she's stunned at the question, and he asks again and says that he could give her living water. Living water. And she said, where do you get this water? And Jesus says, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I give will become in them a spring of water, gushing up to eternal life. A spring of water. Living water. I love that image of living water. It's got a life that's going to grow. It's going to grow in us. She says, sir, give me this water so I may never be thirsty again. So they talk more. He talks about that God is spirit, and we worship God in spirit and in truth. It has nothing to do with the religious practices that so separate us. It's about a matter of spirit. He says, go call your husband, and we'll talk about these things together. She says she has no husband, and he prophesies, he intuits that she's had 4 husbands in the past, and she's with somebody now she's not married with, and he kind of sees her whole life because of his God connection, his ability to intuit. She says, I see you are a prophet, sir. He goes back to her village with her. She leaves the jar behind. She's found the living water now. She's so excited, and she takes him back to the Samaritan village where he stays for 2 days teaching. and spreading this idea of the Spirit of God in you is living water that can grow in you and nourish you for all times. Amazing. She says to the people in her village, come and see a man who told me everything I've ever done. Come and receive this living water. I think it's interesting to think about that in context a little bit. As an unmarried woman with separations behind her, and in her culture, a man could divorce a wife at whim, anytime, and she would be left with nothing. She was utterly dependent upon the support of the men in her life. She would have been very much isolated and excluded in her culture, looked down upon, very separated, must have had a great deal of sense of loneliness and separation. And yet, Jesus saw her as connected with her in this deep way, offering her this living water about the Spirit of God in her. What that must have meant for her. What that must have meant for her. And then she took it back to her village and shared it generously with others. This is a powerful truth about God as living water in us. It's the same idea. The well is here. The wellspring is here. And we forget that sometimes, especially in a dry time. We think we have to find it elsewhere. We have to keep looking and working and trying to make it happen outside instead of right here, opening up the channels of its flowing, drawing from that wellspring that's right here. The fifth one that I thought of, this comes right out of that gospel account, I think, is to keep the wellspring flowing, we have to share it. We share it. We keep the wellspring flowing through us. We must participate in that flow. Emerson said, each of us is the inlet and may become the outlet of all there is in God. It's meant to flow through us, just like that Samaritan woman was guided to say, oh, come back to my village and share this truth with others so they can have this same living water in them. We need to do the same thing. Be ready to give out whatever we receive. I think it's almost instinctive, isn't it? When something good happens to you or you gain something, don't you want to share it with others right away? There's like this instinct. It's like, look what I've discovered. And we all discover this living water in a way. It's like, I've just gained a little bit of this living water. Let me share it with my dear ones. Let me share it with my friends. Let me share it in my community. Let me share it in a book. Let me share it in a song. It's what's behind so much of the generous sharing, nourishing sharing in our communities. We all need to do that. Kind of like that Samaritan woman going back to her village and say, come and meet the man who can give you living water. And it's nice to think of all the others who must have been blessed by those same teachings. Must have been a lot of thirst that got slaked that day. A lot of people who discovered some of that living water. I think we have an ongoing need. Sometimes we're more keenly aware of it than others, but for renewal, for refreshment, for rejuvenation, we need to tap into that wellspring again. And I think it's useful to think about how we do that. If it's a dry season, if we're going through a dry time, we slow down. We rest. We wait. We persist in our practices, our routines, our habits that we know are nourishing, that have brought us wellspring, with that water before and are likely to again. The waters are going to get flowing again. We keep up those practices. Remember the key thing of the wellspring within us. That's where the well is located. And we open up the channels of its flowing and draw from it. I draw from the living water within me. How about that as an affirmation today? I draw from the living water within me. Let's take that into prayer for a moment. Affirm that truth within at all times and in all seasons. In the dry seasons like this one and in all times of our lives, we remember God is the deep wellspring in us that is the source of all our good and the answer to all our needs. Whatever the challenges we face, moment by moment, day by day, we remember this deep truth. We are ready at a moment's notice to turn within, to open the channels within us and to draw from God in us. How grateful we are that God is with us always. So it is. Amen.